What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, a.k.a. ToeTagginTambo, back for another Monday review video. I know we missed this one last week there, but didn't quite have results DB up and ready to go. This week, we've got it back. We just had a crazy good tournament, but I'm going to bring in our other guest first. He's going to be joining me on this show going forward. You guys met him last week. You might have heard him on Dean's podcast or his original podcast he did with him for his interview. TJ Lasig at TJL5124. What's going on, TJ?
Hey, Tambo, how's it going? Exciting day of golf yesterday. Really awesome tournament, and I'm just really excited about the state of the PGA right now. I think we've got a lot of good golf going on. Excited to break it all down with you today.
Yeah, I mean, that was amazing. The event was good. It was fast and furious. We obviously got the tee times moved up, which I talked about on the Saturday night show when I went through. Pretty much round 4 was it was pretty much break even, but it was just based on having no Cantlay. That really hurt me. I kind of woke up. That was the only downfall to having it start that early. I know East Coast for you, I believe, West Coast for me. It's good for both, I think, to have it early, be able to watch it, and then get your day over with, even when there is a 3-hole playoff, which we'll talk about. But I think the big thing for me was just waking up to see Cantlay at like 5 under or 6 under with a streak and an eagle, no bogeys through that many holes. It was through 6 or 7 holes. I was like, that's probably it for the day for me. So did you play Showdown yesterday at all, or how'd your day go?
I did, yeah. Played some Showdown. I think about the same as you. Pretty much a break-even day. No Cantlay for me in Showdown. Had him in the full slate, but yeah, it's good. Good weekend overall.
It's what it did. That's what it was. It was good for the regular, for the classic slate. Obviously, we had a great finish with the Morikawa comeback. Everyone had pronounced it over. I thought it was over, myself included, when JT makes that eagle and Morikawa makes par, and it's like 3-shot lead with 3 to go, and then Morikawa just put the pressure on. The 50-foot bomb in the playoff from JT, all of that made for some crazy finishes. Before we get into this week, I want to talk about, and with all the review stuff, before we get into that, I do want to talk about some promotions this week. I'm not sure if you guys all saw it on Twitter or not already, but for anybody watching this, you're going to be able to have Lineup HQ for PGA free this week. So the GOAT Tiger is back. You're going to be able to get on Lineup HQ, see what a great tool it is, and use it. Myself and Cards will be doing a Wednesday show using Lineup HQ, doing an MME pool, building that up and going around sort of what some of the plays we like are, all that. And then we're also going to feature FanDuel. So more details on this to come throughout the day, throughout the week that you guys will see. But there's going to be a reason to be on there with us for the free show on Wednesday to be able to utilize Lineup HQ, especially on FanDuel this week. So keep your eyes tuned for that. Before we get into this week, I want to go through just to remind everyone quickly, if you go to PGA Results DB, that's where we're getting all of this information, right? You're going back to the Thursday, you're pulling contests, and you can see everything along here of who won them all. Unfortunately, I know my name's not there. I don't see yours, TJ, but we'll move on. It wasn't a bad week for me. How was your week overall? And then I'll talk about some of mine as I get into the Millie Maker and whatnot.
Yeah, a little bit of a tough week for me overall. Certainly not one of my best. Had a pretty good weekend. The prior one, pretty bad this past weekend, but that's just kind of the nature of it. You can't expect to win every single time, but excited to get back at it on another tournament here at the same course, which should be an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, extremely unique this week, right? We've got a replay of the same course, which we never really have. We've got, strongest field to date by far. It's, really strong. I think it's 48 of the world top 50. The only ones missing, I believe, are Tommy Fleetwood, and Adam Scott. So if you look at that field, Tiger's back, like you mentioned, we mentioned, and all the other stuff that goes with it. It's going to make for an exciting tournament. They're letting the rough grow out. They're getting the greens baked out a little more and they'll be faster, all that sort of stuff. So definitely happy we get to jump right back into it. Before I bring up the Millie Maker, I want to go through that one. We always talk about it. Dave Hoffman we'll see here as the winner. Actually had a great lineup. We'll get into that in 2 seconds here. But just talk to me a little bit, TJ, about your process when it comes to reviewing weekly. I like to look at this stuff because it gives me some idea, but I've talked about it in the past, some of the other things I do with looking at not just the winner, because, whoever wins, it's kind of, there's variance involved. It can be luck-based. It's, you just got to put yourself in that position, then you can get lucky. We talk about that quote all the time, but what does your weekly review process look like, and sort of where do you use and what do you do for yours?
Sure. Yeah, so I would actually say that my review process almost starts immediately when lineups lock on Thursday. I'm going in and checking out some of the players that I respect across the industry, seeing what kind of lineup they went with, who they played. That way I'm kind of evaluating their lineup before the results even come into play to skew how I feel about it one way or the other, and just see what I can learn looking at it both from a construction standpoint as well as which specific player did they pick. that's also just good information to have as you head into a weekend of showdowns, right? Evaluating what some of the top guys are using and who they're playing. And then, when it comes to Sunday and reviewing the results, I typically am taking a deeper look at some of the higher buy-in, smaller fields, seeing which lineups had success, seeing what the ownership percentages looks like, just because those are kind of more along the terms of lineups that I would play on a little bit on the chalkier side. But I'm always checking out the Millie Maker and some of the big ones as well. Just, again, looking at what construction they use, what players they use, and seeing if there was a way that I could have backed myself into that logic and played that lineup.
Yeah, two huge points there. I think you made one. The first one is review what you play. I mean, it's definitely fun to go, like you said, for you, the fun is going and look at the Millie just to see. We all will look at ownership and that sort of stuff right away. But as you mentioned, I do the exact same thing in any of my high dollar contests or single entry. I'm looking to see what some of the guys I respect the most, or what I would call the best players in PGA DFS, and what did they build? What construction did they use? What constraints, parameters, anything that I might find. And then again, like you said, sometimes you'll find a play that you're like, they used Hoffman or they used Chase Seifert. Like, that's interesting. And we'll talk about this later on. And the second point, you guys stick around for the end, because what we're going to do is we are going to evaluate at the very end the 3K, which I know, TJ, you play weekly, sort of a week-to-week basis for you. And we're only talking DraftKings here today, but I just wanted to bring that up because we'll get into your mind a little bit on lineup construction in that, the process, a big winner that we had there this week and last. So that's interesting stuff. But let's get into the Millie. It's the fun one. We'll talk about it first. For everyone following along, you just click on the Millionaire. It will take you right in to this screen here. You've got everything set up in front of you. You've got everybody, how they finished. The Human Cespedes, Justin McMahon on Twitter, he had a great week as far as coming second and sixth. Probably, I know he won the Thunderdome, a bunch of other tournaments, so good for him. But yeah, big shout out to Dave Hoffman up top. Single bullet, right? He got it in there straight, one lineup. Lineup goes as this: Justin Thomas, Colin Morikawa, both in the playoff. Jason Day, I think everyone wished they went there instead of Joel Damon at the same price. Obviously, got some leverage bump, and Damon disappeared off the map. He had a rough week there, even more rough than my boy Donnie Trosper. So I at least can die on that hill a little bit easier. And then we've got Poulter, who, again, you talk about a pivot here, and I'm kind of taking some of the steam out of it. I'm going to let you review it here. But, that was Harold Varner was the chalk there. You go to a guy that had good short term was Damon and Varner. He swapped out for Day and Poulter. I do like that. You get an ownership leverage play. You get the stronger guys in the stronger field. And I'll ask you some questions about that in a minute when it pertains to strength of field. And then you got Sabatini, and the interesting one being Hoffman. But Hoffman had been on a little bit of a run as of late, just sort of under the radar, kind of like how we've seen Danny Willett in the last couple events that he's played. So what do you think about the lineup at first glance, and what stands out to you, TJ?
So I think first, from a construction standpoint, it's pretty in line with what I thought the optimal would be going into the week, in terms of picking two of the top price guys, 9K and above, and then filling out with value from there. So he basically went at the very top with Justin Thomas, pretty much at the very bottom of the 9K plus range with Morikawa. Obviously, the two guys that end up in the playoffs, so the right two selections there. And then, the Hoffman one, I mean, you see it, 0.72% ownership. He certainly was not on my radar in any way, but great for him on that call. I mean, he's a guy that has shown spike weeks in the past. And I think another interesting thing is that, you have some guys that long-term are good golfers, but not as of late. And so it's a lineup here where you're going with Jason Day, Ian Poulter. Like, these guys are good golfers long-term. They're not getting a buzz as of late, and it paid off for him here.
Yeah, and that's
also our boy Sabatini. We talked about him a lot on Wednesday, and I guess rightfully so.
Yeah, he's there for sure. I'm going to check something real quick while we're on here. I think 97 for Horschel. Yeah, and he had the money. It doesn't matter. I mean, obviously it wasn't optimal, but won $1 million. Again, congratulations. It's not about that. I was just curious because you and I did talk about Sabatini and going back to the well. If you're going to play him at 8,800, you got to play him at 7,400. I know a lot of us took heat for our Billy Horschel call, and that's why I was just checking, because that was one of the interesting things in this lineup for Dave Hoffman is he had 5 guys under 7.5, give or take, percent, 7.51%. Sorry, 4 guys, I meant to say, and then a couple others at the top. So who really cares? But it just was more to point out the overall ownership isn't always the consensus. Sometimes it's the parameters and the constraints. The segue I just mentioned, and you brought it up already, and what I was going to ask you about was about, the interesting thing with the start from the break and coming back from everything from the coronavirus and all these restart events. The strength of field has obviously got a lot stronger. I kind of hit it a little bit, and spoiler alert, a little bit with Day and Poulter versus Varner and Damon. Varner and Damon definitely were popping on every model that people had out there because of their recent form and their recent results, as well as they're not terrible long-term golfers. But what had happened was you had those reasons and then all the ownership that came with them, right? They had a bunch of ownership. And you talk about these fields and the strength of field. So do you look at that more when you're building some of these lineups, not just for the Millie, but even for your own? I know we talk about some of that later, but he just played better golfers. I know it sounds easy to say just play the best plays. Day is better than Joel Damon long term. They might have the same initials, but one has a lot more accolades when it comes down to it. And at the same price, I think the bottom line is you got Jason Day. Of course, he hasn't done well at, so people said that, but also at the same time, it was his home course, Muirfield Village in Ohio, where he hails from. So what do you do when it comes down to that? And do you do it just based off ownership, or is it because the fact that it's a double down on the strength of field, the long-term ability, and the ownership? What's that for you?
So I personally fell into the Joel Damon trap like I know a bunch of others did. And
yeah, me too.
My goodness, that couldn't have been more dead more early on. That was just a total disaster. But yeah, Jason Day wasn't really in consideration for me this week, but I think it's a great leverage spot. Like you said, getting him at under 5% ownership. He's a guy that any given week can spike up. He's been, there's been times when he's a top 10, top 5 golfer in the world, and that ability is always going to be there some way. So I think that on any given week, he's always going to be a riskier play just because he's Jason Day, but he's always going to have that upside. And I think even with one good week here, he'll still continue to come in at low ownership the rest of the way. I mean, unless he goes on a consistent run, I don't see him becoming a popular option anytime soon.
Yeah, and I agree. And we'll briefly preview the pricing for this week that came out. I tried to predict it myself last night and was a little bit off. I forgot they've got 177K Millie to fill up this week. So they definitely went extremely soft, even more than usual in my opinion, but we'll see. We'll get to that. One other note was, you mentioned with Jason Day being risky, and just as sort of trying to feed my thoughts out to the people, I was just, thinking out of the gate, is that while he is risky and doesn't have the form or the course history technically at this course, if you want to take, 5 events or 10 events and call it a good sample size, kind of all we get these days. But I guess the big thing is, isn't Joel Damon still risky? Isn't Cameron Champ at the same price still risky? So that's where I'm learning, and just my 2 cents going into these events. And this week, I mean, pretty much everyone's a strong play. So it's really more for these events that were still strong, but not as strong as something like this week, but have been much stronger than those in the past, where you've got guys like this price range, Damon, Champ, and Day. They're all risky, but Day is the much better long-term golfer. You're taking the risk, but you're trying to win $1 million. And in this case, it paid off. I do want to show off one thing here. This lineup in second, I believe here. Yeah. Hovland, Morikawa, Woodland, Fitzpatrick, Horschel, and Poulter. 633 points. This is definitely not a toot my own horn thing. This is way off the mark, but I just want to go down here and show a couple things. One, my second best lineup. I told you about falling into the Varner trap. It's the exact same lineup as the second place lineup with a 1v1 from Poulter. Poulter's my guy. He won me over 6 figures at the Shell Houston Open when he had that crazy comeback, made that big putt at the end, and then beat Bo Hostler in the playoff. Again, it's generators and things doing it wrong, but my point is just it's funny to see that you can be that close and still be this far away at 601st place. So keep grinding. You know it's in the pool. You know it's there. I do want to show one more thing in the Millie, and then I'll leave it if you have anything else to talk about. For people that don't believe me about the Donnie Trosper thing, look, I played him too. Okay, 0.17. I still stand by, the play being a capable Millie Maker play. It was 0.17% owned. What I do know is, and part of my review process, and you talked about some of it, is right away looking at what some of the other guys are, and then at the end of it all, going back and see what other guys scored, being a little more results-oriented. But just out of curiosity, MJ Dafu, that was the other Monday Q at the exact same price that we mentioned, scored like 87 or something, or 89, and ended up being in like the top 12 in the Millie if I just get the Q right. So again, a one-off means nothing now, but I like to go back to show you that I'm a man of my word. I play the guys that I say. I used about 3 or 4% of Trosper, trying to get some of these unique builds in there and just get a little bit different. And this build too, look, the same guys from the winning line or the second place lineup. There was Hovland, Morikawa, Woodland, Fitzpatrick. And instead of using, I believe it was Poulter and Horschel, I went with dropping down and going up and try and get some of that Ricky Fowler bounce back. Didn't work out because of Trosper, but I digress and we move on. Let's talk about this next, TJ. Let's talk about, first off, we'll talk about this $5. They brought it back, the Drive to Green. It's back again for this week with 100K up top, about a 97,000 person field, I believe. But last week, it was a 71,000 person field. I wasn't sure if this was a bot that won it. 530747's the screen name, but 150 lineups. Couple things I noticed, and then I'll get your takes. A lot more max entry guys got it done in this event, right? You look across the top, you got the guy in first, the guy in third, fourth. A-Hits Pat is a wonderful player. He's out there all the time near the top. I've competed with him quite a bit in the past. He's got fifth. JTG10, another RG member, and then a lot of the guys down here, Beef Stew and H Potts. How do you ever play that, like something like the $5 150 max, or have you in the past? And would you approach it any differently based on almost 100,000 less people than the Millie Maker? What's your thoughts on that?
So I don't max enter it. I do throw a couple lineups into it typically. I think you can play a little bit more standard, I guess. I mean, with the Millionaire Maker being so top heavy, you've got, what is it, 50% or 33%? All goes up top. I forget the total.
33 to 45%. Yeah, you're right with that. It's quite a bit.
Right. And I mean, you look here and it's actually less than 20% the first. So I think with the $5, while you're always going for the top, there's more value in having a lot of lineups that cash. Whereas in the Millionaire Maker, it's really boom or bust, all or nothing. You're going for that number one spot. So you'll probably see some more off the board stuff in the Millionaire Maker than you would in the $5 like this, just because of the payout structure and also the number of entrants as well. And I mean, you can see that with that top lineup, right? That seems like a much more attainable lineup. Like, yeah, okay, Cypher is pretty off the board. I actually played him in my main lineup on FanDuel just because I like to punt off a spot there sometimes. So I played him at the minimum price on FanDuel. But I mean, I look at this lineup and say, okay, yeah, I could see myself coming up with that lineup. The Hoffman, Jason Day one, I could never see myself ending up there. So I think that's one difference that I would. Yeah, I mean,
he would have won the 530-747. He would have won the Millie with this build. Ooh, right? It's 667, and it happens. I wonder. I'm going to check very quickly here just to see. In the Millie, he wasn't in there, so maybe it's not his stakes, and that's whatever. But that's why I wondered. I mean, obviously, I think I approach it pretty similar just because of that. But like you said, I think it's one thing to point out, and what you kind of talked about for your FanDuel, and I know Cards and I will talk on the Wednesday show a lot about it this week, is that there's a lot of different strategies on FanDuel, but you can still apply some of that theory over here. I mean, the overwhelming theme is that on FanDuel, the pricing is softer. So you can throw a guy like Chase Seifert, who I believe was 7K over there, and then you can start fitting all the guys above 10K, which means you can get a pretty stacked lineup, assuming your guys do their job, make the cut, and you got a couple of the winners in there, or the winner, I should say, can't have a couple, but then a couple of the guys that finish in the top along with the winner up there. Now, over here, and what I like about this lineup is kind of what you said. He's applying some of the FanDuel theory, just going as a one-off with Chase Seifert, who definitely wasn't that bad of a play. I think it was a great play, and it turned out to pay off, but I mean, everyone sort of knew a little something about him. They just didn't want to go there if you see 0.51%. But then look what it allowed him to get. Like you said, Justin Thomas, Morikawa, Woodland, Horschel, Poulter, all the plays that people liked and had a little bit more ownership, but he was allowed to change and be a little bit more chalky with four guys above 10% by using a 0.51% while still almost going to the full salary cap and then really blowing out the field. So props to 530-747. I think it's a great lineup. I think it shows that, you can apply some of the theory from both sides. It is what it is. You're never going to be down about a $50,000 payday, and you don't know when you're putting them in if it would have won the Millie. You just can't be worried about that. I know you don't max enter a lot, but let me ask you this question then. If you were to play like me, I play the $20 max, put the 150 lineups into the Millie, and I'll put the 150 in this. Would you, with your style or personality, would you be more likely to dupe them, or would you be more likely to run uniques and just try and take down a high prize, whether it's 50K and it would have won? Oh, well, you still came away with 50K, but you got more of your entries in play that way. And by saying uniques, guys, for those that don't know, I'm talking about running 300 different lineups, but it's still you on your account on two separate tournaments. The risk you take is like this. If it was me, if I was this guy running these lineups here and a different 150 in the millie, and this would have won the millie and vice versa, I would have been pretty down because I'm $950K shy of what I could have won, but I'd still be up for the week because it's a $50,000 score. So what's your take on that, TJ?
I would definitely make 150 and then put it in twice into each tournament. Personally, I don't think I could handle making 150 in two different spots and then having one that would have been the millie hit and one that 50K would be great. Don't get me wrong, but it's certainly not a million. So yeah, I would take that 150 lineup. I mean, I also just think once you get into making 300, like you're just taking a massive equity drop on that, the 200th through 300th lineups. I understand any lineup could win, but my mentality would just be find the 150 that you like and enter them into both tournaments.
Yeah, you're certainly looking to try and get an edge with the amount of builds. So for the guys that maybe locked Brooks at the Rocket Mortgage Classic, 150 Brooks builds is pretty solid, but 300's also nice. And I know, multiple people said, hey, I had like double the field on Brooks. Sorry, I'm talking about Bryson here, guys. I apologize. But for saying I doubled the field on Bryson and I still broke even or I still didn't make money. And it's just because there was a lot of people had them, and then you have to get different combinations. And so I think some people like to do that. I'm kind of with you. I don't really like to risk it too far out because then what if, like you said, you kind of that feeling of walking the plank after you could have had that $1 million and you just didn't. So maybe do, a different strategy as far as that goes. A couple more I want to talk about. One more here especially. I want to talk about the 555. I bring it up every week. The thing about the 555 is I know it doesn't fit everybody's bankroll, but I think it's what a lot of people want to strive towards, right? If you want to have that first big hit, first talking about a couple things, and maybe you can chime in on this in a second, but $9 satellites, there's, I think, $27 satellites, $43 satellites. I get that it's not as pretty as, putting your money into a $33 or a $44, but I mean, your odds in the, 2 milli makers are just lottery tickets, whereas you could put them into a couple satellites or 4 or 5 satellites in this range and try and get one of these tickets where the next week you're up against a field of, 1,700 to, in this week, I think it's 2,500 or 2,200. And you can then play for 200 to 250,000, where you definitely, look at this, almost 100 points less than the $5, in what the winner had. So what's your take on just satellites in general, any range? I know you might play them at the higher stakes and talk about why. And then on using something like that as a strategy to get into this, where your odds are probably a lot higher. They are by math, but just, people worry too much, I think, about field strength. And now I'm going against the big boys or girls, quote unquote. And it's not so much about that. It's more about getting your odds in the field with the big prize. So talk me through some of that stuff.
I think it's something definitely worthwhile to look into. I mean, like you said, look at the top score here compared to what we saw in the milli and in the $5. It's almost 100 points difference. And look at this lineup. This is absolutely a lineup I could have built. I mean, I played Norlander in my main lineup. I liked Poulter. I liked all these plays. And to me, that's the thing. You can, if you work your way up into either by playing a satellite, or maybe you play some cash games to try to build up that bankroll with the goal of, hey, once I get up $500, I'm gonna take my shot in this tournament, and anyone can win it. I wouldn't get too caught up in the strength of field in terms of the DFS players. I mean, you can only have so much of an edge. If you make a good lineup, you could easily win it. You see it up here. The top two guys only had 1 entry each, 3 entries for the other two. You're not going against as many crazy combinations as you are in those other tournaments, and it gives you such a higher % chance of winning. And also, like, you min cash, you make $500. That's not so bad either. And
right.
I just think it just feels much more attainable. I mean, you look at a lineup of Cantlay, Hovland, Woodland, Horschel, Poulter, Norlander. It's a very makeable lineup. It's not too off the board, and that's the kind of thing that gets me excited and feels attainable.
Yeah, so just curious quickly, too, before I go into that, because I want to talk more about this lineup for a second, but do you play satellites at the higher stakes to try and get into some of these bigger events, or do you prefer just to buy in? It's to each their own. I just was curious on your end, because I think, it's something I've struggled with in the past, and just that's kind of the fun of having you on with me now and be able to shoot some stuff back and forth, is that I love playing the satellites. I just don't know if I'm as good at them, and that tends to, what I'm working on with my game. I'm trying to get better at single entry and 3 entry max and all that sort of stuff. But do you play satellites at all? And then what's just your general thoughts on, someone who wants to get better at them or better at single to 3 max?
I actually have not done a lot of satellite play in the past. So what's the typical field there? Like, it's just, I mean, depends on the buy-in, obviously, but is it just one seat that goes off?
Yeah, typically it's a winner take all, and you're looking anywhere from 20 guys, 20 folks up to 100, let's say,
right.
And it's going to be somewhere around a winner take all. But the idea is, it's normally one or two max. That's about it. The odd time with the 100-man field, I think it's 3 max, but it is a little bit different. How to get after it at the top. So what's your? I guess because we'll get to that in the 3K in a second. Maybe we'll hold it for 2 seconds actually, because we'll talk about your strategy. I think what you do in the 3K would be very applicable to what we're talking about here. So we will pause it for 2 seconds. I want to talk about this lineup. You mentioned it and ran through it, but I think the funny thing is just a couple comments on the points you made. Yes, there's single entry guys at the top, so you shouldn't worry about as much about that. Here's my next thing: Oriental Express, Court Jesters, MCamp B05, Schmitto, who does our RotoGrinders sports betting article. All these guys are extremely good players, and they're putting in tasteful ties. All these guys, they're not going really more than 3 to 10 or 15. They're not putting in, 53 or 20. Even Osimo is only putting 20 in when you can max out at 53. And that's where I'm saying you don't really have to worry so much. Yes, it's a little bit scary that these top players have all these lineups in there, but that's why I think it's worth going after, because I guess this is what I want to say about this lineup is if you look at this lineup is, okay, go to the expert survey on RotoGrinders. We all love Patrick Cantlay. I know myself, Cards, I think you as well. We're the 3 of us that mentioned Cantlay as one of our favorite golfers, regardless of anything. Hovland, a guy that I had as a conviction play in my filter, and that I know that everyone still liked for the week. It was, his price was there. It seemed right. We'd seen what he's been doing tee to green. He just couldn't make any putts. Definitely fit the mold of a guy to play this week. Woodland, a couple of them, myself included, mentioned as our favorite tournament player to get in tournaments this week. Again, a couple bad rounds, but we were monitoring the driver. He'd had a week of rest. Could he bounce back and do what he did at Colonial? He did. I know it was a slow start for this guy, but man, 101.15 paid off. Horschel, like I said, we all took some heat, but I know in the ratings, we all pretty much had him. Cards, Noto, myself. I'm not even sure who else, but everyone was on Horschel. They liked him. Cards and Noto had him beside my Woodland as favorite tournament play of the week. Norlander was my favorite long shot bet of the week, and one I believe you mentioned in your value plays article at 6,500. And then Poulter, the guy that sort of fits. Now, it sucks if you end up with Varner here. I get it. It could have happened. But the idea is you could have also still had Sabatini here and probably been just fine. I think it was still very close. We just looked at that, 94-ish. So he would have been very close to the same spot. So either way, you would have won 6 figures. Who if this was anyone but Varner, and this, in B. Shammy 22's case, congratulations to them. They've got the right one in there with Poulter. But I guess it just goes to show, and back to your original point, you definitely need a different strategy for this. And you don't need it, but I'm just saying you also don't need to be as aggressive as far as the parameters go on making sure you get a 1% guy in your lineup. If it happens, it can happen. So be it. Look at Zach Johnson in the second place lineup. But mind you, Zach Johnson ended up being the lowest scoring play in this, now a lot better than Max Homa, who crushed me. But I guess, without going in a million circles here, the idea is just that look at some of these lineups and, again, just play some of the plays you like, maybe get a random one-off, and you've got yourself a pretty good lineup. So anything more here on the 555 before we dive into the 3K?
I would just iterate that. Play the players that you like. I think ownership is very important, but I think that sometimes people get a little bit caught up in that, right? And we can only predict ownership so much, too.
Right.
I mean, yeah, people are like, oh, Patrick Cantlay is going to be the highest owned guy. Yeah, he was 27% owned, but it's not like it's NBA where he's 60% owned. Like, right. He's still only 27%, and if he's a good play, and he played pretty horribly for 3 rounds, and then it backdoors his way into a top 10. So just pick the guys you like and play them, and yeah, I really, really like this lineup. It's something I could have seen myself landing on. I'm disappointed that I didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. And to make a point that you just said there, one last thing is it just, I guess 2 last things. One would be, I'm guilty of it myself. Look at me with Brooks or with Bryson. I keep calling him Brooks. I can't wait for the Bryson Brooks battle this week. That's why I'm so hyped. But Bryson, he was going to be 30% owned. He was the highest priced golfer. I think of it as like a game theory thing, but at the same time, if you look at the course with 4 par 5s, drivable par 4s, a dude that's strong enough to drive it through all the rough, and we'll preview him at the end here. But I guess, that's my own mistake. It's something I'll learn from, that you could have just differentiated elsewhere, and that's clearly what people did with Cantlay. The last point I would say, the only thing I really worry about in something like this, I don't want to say don't worry about the chalk, but I would try and stay off more than 2 over 20%. Because then you really get up there into the, you know, if you want to talk about, you know, in football, some people mention a quote-unquote bust rate, where there's a higher chance that one of them is going to not make it or bust. And like Cantlay was almost a candidate for that. He obviously had the great Sunday round, but we knew he had it in him. He just had to get it done. He almost didn't even make the cut, if you recall. He had a eagle down the stretch that he needed on Friday, a little bit of up and down in the last few holes, and then made it through at 3 under, I believe. But yeah, we'll move on. I just thought that was interesting. Again, congrats to Bishemi 22. And then the last one, the 3K, not going to spend a lot of time in the lineups. A lot of the same guys we see, give a special shout out in a second, but the Human Cespedes right up there again. We talk about him winning the Thunderdome, 50,000 in this, a couple top sixes in the Millie Maker. Awesemo, love to see it. He's always up there. Mark F., great guy. Rob Kaufman, these are guys I see on Twitter all the time. Healy BJ, they're all members. Jet Black, Hoop, the man, Hoop 2410, Dasberg, all these guys that we see up there, all the time. Good weeks for them. But got to give a special shout out to Petty Theft. Big deal here. He doesn't talk about himself. Pretty humble guy. Absolutely destroys NBA. Not very active on Twitter, but he's on there if you want to give him a shout out. But man, the big thing on this, and I follow this stuff because I like to say what's going on in the industry. He'll never talk about it himself. He won this tournament last week for $100K. He won the $200 single entry last week for $100K. We got to pick a lineup. Everyone talks about multi-entering and all this. This is high stakes, big time money. Then he comes back this week and says, let's run it back, wins not only first for $125K, but second. So that's more than $400K in back-to-back weeks. I'm going to shuffle quickly. The $200 single entry, you get one lineup in this, goes third place for another 20 grand and really just a few points back. It is a dupe of this lineup, but man, incredible job by him to win almost $500,000. I'm sure he won well over $500,000 when you get into all the other stuff he put these in, but just a dominant performance in those tournaments. Going to go back to the 3K here. We'll look at his winning lineup. We don't got to talk about specifically your lineup this week, TJ, but before we talk about your process, and we'll end there, and then with the preview of the pricing for this week, talk to me about Petty Theft's lineup here. So he's got Hideki, Morikawa, Kuchar, Woodland, Day, who you already talked a little bit about, and Seifert. Interestingly enough, before I pass it over, he used a couple of the plays that we talked about and then sort of shimmied them together and then goes back to some of the long-term stuff. So what are your first thoughts just seeing that lineup as the winner?
First thought is that you can see it's a little bit more balanced, right? You're not seeing Justin Thomas in here. And I think when you get higher in the buy-ins, you'll see that a lot more. Last 2 weekends ago with Bryson was an exception just because he was so far and away the best play, even though he was the highest priced guy. But
I know.
you see people being, starting with Hideki down to Morikawa, 2 8K guys. You'll start to see more condensed lineups. Now he did go all the way down to Seifert at 6,200, and you can see. But it's also interesting, right? 1.2% owned here, which was like double what we saw him in the other tournament. So you can see that that he was getting a little bit more love at the higher stakes. So you can just kind of see that people are looking into those plays. But I think it's a really solid lineup. You've got the 3 chalky guys, Hideki, Morikawa, Woodland. We all knew they would be in that 20% owned range. Kuchar, I'm actually surprised Kuchar came in at only 10%, but long-term form play, like we talked about. Jason Day, another long-term form type of guy. And then the Seifert play, great call by him. He had an unbelievable weekend. And even the weekend prior, he was a little bit on my radar. I think he went 6 under in the first round and then blew up and shot like 3 over to miss the cut by maybe 1 on the second day. But I saw some people on him last weekend, so that's what kind of piqued my interest and ended up with me landing on him on FanDuel. So yeah, I think the more you play like FanDuel or some of the showdowns, you get more comfortable with some of these lower priced guys, and I think that can become pretty important because it gives you a little bit of a different perspective, and again, gives you that comfortability of knowing who some of these 6K guys are and being able to pull the trigger and put $3,000 on him. Good for him for that. But great lineup.
Yeah, we'll never get inside the mind of Petty Theft. Maybe we will. I'd love to get him on a show. I think, extremely sharp dude. Love to see something like this. One of the things I would say is I think, without knowing what he's thinking, is the idea here looks like, back to what I just said about the previous tournament, and obviously it gets crazier as you go back. Let's go back to the Millie Maker for a second. Not even one play at 20%. You go to the signature hole we talked about. Let's maybe not go over 2 because, there's still 1780 in the field. And then you go here, and he's got 3. But again, knowing that he's sharp, knowing, what his thoughts are probably is, when you get a Seifert in there, you can pretty much do what you want. So if his guys were a little more balanced with Decky, Morikawa, Woodland, Seifert makes it work. Who fits? And then starts looking at 2v2s, which typically is how you're going to sort of look at a structure like this, or at least myself in the past. You look back to it, like you said, those 2 long-term plays just look like the safety for the made cut, definitely a possible upside, ownership that's not going to be too out there, and then look what you still get. Even as long as you get 150 points between the 2 of them, which he did more than that, you still get your other plays as sort of your must-haves. And then when your other guy goes off like this down here, I mean, interestingly enough, we'll go to his second lineup. He's the other guy.
Double down. Wow.
Double down. Now, he's got 5 lineups. It's maybe, again, one thing is he's got $200,000 to play with from the week before. I think he would have done it anyway. Like I said, I know he knows what he's doing, so that's sort of the main point. But when you got 5, he's not doing it on all of them, but he's going to take a stand on a couple. And those he knows will propel him to the top of the board if it helps him get that 6 out of 6 through. And honestly, another point I'll make, just, my own knowledge and seeing it from the past and learning both the hard way and getting it right myself, both ways, is that I like to have the 1% play on the low-end guy, because in an example of both of his lineups here is if he gets Seifert wrong and Seifert misses another cut, you still got Matsuyama, Morikawa, who ends up being the winner, Kuchar, Woodland, Day, all these big names. That's a pretty damn strong 5 out of 6. And I'm not sure if anyone else here at the top. Yeah, right away, look. Justin McMahon again here. Homa, similar to my issue in all my big lineups that cost me my upside this week. I had a pretty good week, but the upside was all lost to a 1 max Homa at 28 points on missing the cut on the number. But look at that. Again, same thing. His cheapest, second cheapest golfer in his case. But when you get a cheap golfer not get through and the rest come through for you, you can still win $50K off the single bullet for 3,000 and do pretty well on top of what he did the rest of the week. So I think it just goes to show that's another thing that stands out for me. Petty Theft's second lineup was, a couple pivots. He had, Morikawa in there still, Seifert in there still. And then it looks like he switched up. JT, Reed, Horschel, Cauley. I think sharp call on Cauley because that was sort of the Homa pivot. What was Homa in this?
I fell into Homa trap.
Same thing. Homa in this, though, was 18%. And you look at Cauley, still heavily owned versus that because, again, more sharp, the sharper guys making sharper moves, moved to 10%. But, again, he didn't come through either. He was very close, had his run, didn't happen. But the rest, pretty good. Reed, sort of fell apart, had a good thing going and fell back. We'll see what people do with him this week. Any other comments when it comes to just, running lineups in something like this and how it pertains maybe back to my satellite example on overall build structure, roster construction, and just difference of being up against the field like this? What are your final thoughts when it comes down to it?
Well, can you flip back to what JT's ownership was in the bigger ones? I saw he was 10% in the 3K. What was he? I just feel like he was lower owned in the higher.
Yeah. So he was 10% there. He was 12.7.
Not that much different then.
And then 15. So interestingly
15.
enough, is people were getting off him as the stakes went up.
Yeah. I just think, and I guess going back to your comment on the lower priced guys, right? I think it's a big call out there is that you can try to sort of punt off one spot if you have a guy that you think can get through the cut at a very low salary. It puts you in a great position to have 5 other strong golfers, but then also, especially with these new cut rules in the T65, we saw that come directly into play for the second time since the restart, right? There was a bunch of guys that if it was still T70 in ties would have made the cut that didn't make the cut here. It's really difficult to get 6 of 6 through. I think this coming week may be an exception because it's a smaller field. So I'd expect, and soft pricing. So I'd expect more guys to get through the cut. So it's week dependent, but you'll see that, you can't be scared of playing a guy that might miss the cut because most likely someone in your lineup is going to miss the cut. And so you got to think, okay, if I assume that I'm getting 5 of 6, how can I get a 5 of 6 lineup that can still at least cash and maybe even get into a top 10 of some of these tournaments?
Yeah, that's what I like the most about that. That's what I was kind of saying, where he's thinking very safe with Matsuyama, Morikawa, and Woodland for guys that definitely should make the cut and have upside. You get, Seifert in there as a risk, but then your other 2 dudes get to be Kuchar and Day. Like, again, is Day risky? Yes, but he's a good pivot off the Dahmen chalk. And then also you got a guy like Kuchar who definitely has high make the cut odds. So you're looking at, like you just said, if I'm going to end up 5 or 6, what do I want that to look like? And you just made a strong point there, and it tied in with what I said before. Not going to spend too much time here. I know that Cards and I, like I mentioned, are going to be on the free show Wednesday going through FanDuel. So I'm going to pop up DraftKings. Again, I mentioned at the top of the show, I had a little bit of fun this week trying to predict the pricing. Way too many guys over 10K. I didn't, I knew the field was only 133, but I thought that they might try and do a little something different where they space it out a bit more. They're going to stick to what they've been doing all along and just throwing like 75 guys below 7,000 and then just figure out the few up here. So pretty spaced out. We might not go through all of it. So let's just talk about the top range. That makes the video, for everybody a little bit shorter. And the ability, I know later on, if you guys are following along, it's free, but you can follow along the Fantasy Golf Degenerates podcast. Kenny Kim will be back on this week with me. We'll go through some more stuff with you. But I think for right now, TJ, let's just talk about this because the pricing came out and the new crowned, everyone's, self-crowned king, Bryson DeChambeau, at the top, 11.1K. So talk to me about Bryson and then down all the way to Morikawa at 10K.
Not surprised to see Bryson coming in as the highest priced golfer. I think that's the correct decision by DraftKings here. And 11-1 seems like the right price from him, but then it gets pretty soft with some of these. I'm surprised to see Tiger's only 9K. I was expecting him to be like 10K maybe. I have no idea how to handle Tiger, but I think 9K is an interesting price for him because I think if they put him at 10K, everyone's going to say, oh, that's an easy fade. 9K, that's a pretty good price for Tiger. I think Cantlay stuck out to me as coming all the way down to 9.8K, especially with the hot Sunday. I could see him being a guy that maybe gets some steam. Morikawa got the big price jump up to 10K and a stronger field now. I'll be curious to see if that picks up steam or if people are going to say that. To me, that feels a little high for him. Jon Rahm all the way down at 9.3. That's got to be the lowest we've seen him in a while. Yeah, I would think. But it's going to be, gosh, look at this list of names. Except for Justin Rose, he's dead to me after last week. But except for him,
Noto said
everyone
the same
looks
thing.
Great.
He crushed some lineups for some people. But I think there's some interesting ones. Like I said, I'll delve into it more later on the podcast with Kenny. But, you got Brooks, who I think people are still going to want to play. You got Rahm, popular, 9,300. Hovland, if people he led to tee to green now. I think he's the first ever, Justin Ray said on Twitter, as far as, posting stats out. I think that Victor Hovland is the first ever since, tracking it back in 2004 to lead 3 events in a row, tee to green and not win or something, or maybe just in general. I got to look back at the stat. But, yeah, it was pretty incredible there. No one really likes to play Webb ever, but, he's, I think, vying for number 1 I saw this week in the world. So whether you believe in OWGR or not, it's not – that predictive, but I think that at the end of the day, it's still something that's interesting. Like you said, Cantlay will definitely be popular. Now, just quickly before we end here, nobody really likes to play the previous week's winner. Andy came with a price bump. So I think you're right on Morikawa. DJ looks a little expensive when people are thinking I can just go down and get all these guys. So he might be a little bit overlooked. But we'll end on this. Let's just talk through these 3. So you got Bryson, Justin Thomas, and Rory, and you can only pick one. What do? You can obviously pick more, but I'm just trying to put you on the spot. Yeah. Take an early stand. It's an early look. Just let's talk about this. You can only pick one. Who do you pick in that range and why?
I think I might actually go with Rory here because I think he's going to be the least popular of the 3, just with JT's performance last week and Bryson being Bryson right now. But I think that if it was 3 weeks ago, then Rory would clearly be the highest priced golfer in this field. I think 10-7s, again, I feel like we've always seen Rory over 11K. And I still feel, I'm coming around to Bryson being the best golfer in the world, but I still think Rory kind of takes that title. And so maybe, and he hasn't played in like 2 weeks, so maybe people are off of him. And I just still think Rory's a great golfer. Again, haven't looked into too much, but that'd be my gut off the top here.
Yeah, I'm really stuck. That's why I wanted to ask you because it'll take me some time here. I only have a few hours before I do the show with Kenny, but I think the big thing is, I'm coming around with you. I think if you aren't on the Bryson train yet, it might be time. I know it's, a lot of talk's going to be around approach and, proximity, whatever you want to talk about. But one thing that was, noted last time, and I talked about on last week's podcast was just, in a recap of them was, a lot of people wanted to bring up like US Open and stuff. And you just look, some of those shots he hit out of the rough, he just has the power. So it might not even matter if he is in this 4-inch rough. that he can still get it up there. He's been getting better with the putter. He's been getting better with the around the green. He's been doing stuff that, for 11-1, it might just be the time. Like you said, I think JT will be popular because of that. There'll still be people that want to pivot from Bryson to Rory, and we'll see. One thing I do know, and I'll leave you with this, is that in softer pricing events and majors, people worry a lot more about ownership, and for whatever reason, you'll just see that it's because of the soft pricing, but it's extremely balanced. People are going to play everybody in this range, so nobody can really get to, I don't really see anyone here who's going to get to 35 or 30. Tiger will be interesting. Cantlay, Rahm, some of those guys. But when it comes to these guys at the top, I think, 25 would be tough for me to see. It'd be more like 20 or 22 maybe max that I'm seeing, and we're cutting hairs. So we'll see it. We'll follow it as the week goes along. I know you've got some more content coming out. We'll be doing other shows, things like that. Anything, final thoughts? Otherwise, let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today. Excited to be doing this on a weekly basis going forward. I think there's going to be an awesome tournament coming up. I mean, it's basically a major quality field here. We've got, like you said, everyone except for Fleetwood and Adam Scott in the field. It's going to be really interesting to see we've got kind of like the old guard. We got Tiger coming back. We've got the Brysons and the JTs. We've got the young guys and the Morikawas and the Hovlands. So really excited to see how this shakes out. And it's going to be hard to make a lineup you don't look at and just love with all of these names. So it's going to be fun building lineups. And I'll have my value article coming out this week. I'll also be hopping on the podcast with Dean again to break down the slate later this week. And thanks for having me on, Tambo.
Right on, man. I appreciate it. You guys know where to find me. Follow me on Twitter at ToeTagginTambo. I'll have the show out later with Kenny, previewing tier by tier and going more in depth on this pricing for this week. As TJ said, it's going to be a phenomenal week. We've got a lot of good guys as far as all the narratives, all the pricing, everything that you want. And like you said, every lineup's going to look good. That's how they fill the 177,000 person $20 Millie Maker with all the rake and the top heavy structure. So should be a lot of fun. Tune in later this week for Cards and I as well on Wednesday for the FanDuel show. Lineup HQ. Other than that, guys, thank you and good luck.